I come from very humble beginnings. My mom's from a very, very small country town in Arkansas. My dad was an orphan. So it was just the three of us. We started, in Detroit, and then just to see how my parents were able to work hard and help out the community. My grandfather was a farmer, so he used extra crops he would pass out to folks within the community. And it just was a part of who I am. Like, it's almost like I need to make sure that the community's good, my family's good. Think about how much better we can make the world for our kids, for our families, for our communities, for those who might need it in the future, right? We're planting trees now, but maybe our grandkids will be able to sit under the shade with those in the future. What made me want to get involved with United Way, I was approached with the opportunity, again, from some of our leaders at Social Innovation at Toyota. And when I found out they did so much within healthcare and financial literacy and education, which are, again, really, really big and passions of mine, I was like, I have to get involved. Cornel West once said that you can't lead the people if you don't love the people, and you can't save the people if you don't serve them. So living united means loving, leading, saving, and serving with others in mind. I live united because it gives me the opportunity to create and lead change.
Hello to our bigBANG audience here in Dallas. We are so excited to have you all with us this week as we talk all things social impact, social justice, how we accomplish really important things here in our community. Today we are incredibly honored to have some folks with us who do extraordinary work. Most of you know Jennifer Sampson, who is the president and CEO of the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas. I can't tell you enough great things about Jennifer. Her bio is in your app today for the conference, so I won't waste time going through all that, except to offer to Jennifer my deepest gratitude for all the support that you have given to social venture partners, particularly through this conference. You have been with us as a co-producer of this bigBANG conference now for 8 years. We have tackled some really tough conversations on a public stage. You all have never shied away from those conversations, and they are more important than ever. So Social Venture Partners and the whole community of Dallas owes you a big debt of gratitude. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation. What an honor it is for us to have you here. As I mentioned to you right before showtime, I've spent a lot of time this past week listening to a lot of your YouTube interviews, and you have been interviewed by so many important and incredible people that I'm quite nervous about this today. But all of that aside, we are thrilled that you would be with us in Dallas to visit with our audience, particularly as you lead this phenomenal organization, a $14 billion or more foundation that you manage, and the work that you do in social justice is just extraordinary. So we are thrilled to have you with us. We hope that you will share any insightful things that you have with our audience, even if they don't directly answer my question. And we particularly want to talk about your perspective on some things that are happening here in Texas. Speaking of Texas, this is kind of a homecoming for you. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Texas in the early years.
Well, thank you so much, Tony. It's a huge honor for me to be with you and Jennifer today. And of course, I am a Texan. Forever, I will be a Texan, although I am a resident and love New York City. Texas is in my DNA. It's impossible to grow up in Liberty County, Texas, attend the University of Texas, both as an undergraduate and a law student, and to experience the breadth and depth, complexity, contradictions, beauty of that great state and not have it indelibly leave a mark on your life. And it has profoundly affected my life and how I see the world growing up there in Texas. And of course, Dallas in particular, because I have so many friends in Dallas that it's just a huge delight for me. So thank you, Tony, so much for the invitation.
We are thrilled to have you. You talk a little bit in some of those interviews, and I encourage our bigBANG audience to watch some of those YouTubes as you go into great depth on things. But you talked a little bit about the role of the Head Start program in your life. And I want to talk about that in terms of how you feel about government programs to actually benefit. And so talk a little bit about the role that the Head Start program had in your early development.
Well, I was very lucky, Tony, because in 1965, I lived with my mother and sister in Ames, Texas. Ames, Texas was in East Liberty County. Indeed, Liberty County, the county seat, was Liberty, Texas. Ironically, African Americans could not live in Liberty, Texas. We lived in the next town, Ames, Texas, which is about 1,000 people then, mostly dirt roads. And we lived in a little shotgun house on one of those dirt roads. And on one occasion, a lady approached the porch as she was walking up and down the road talking to people to tell my mother about a new program that President Johnson was starting called Head Start. And that program I enrolled in the first summer of 1965. And it changed my life. And it did, in many ways, give me some insight into the role of public policy, also philanthropy. The Ford Foundation helped to pilot the early experiments that created Head Start. So this program for me was a game changer. And many years later, when I was lucky enough to be a student at the University of Texas, one of the rewards for being a student leader was that I occasionally was invited to lunch with Mrs. Johnson. And one of the most memorable and gratifying moments of my life was having her tell me about the origins of Head Start and how she wished her husband could have lived to see people like me, young people from low-income backgrounds, who had benefited from Head Start, because that was his vision and her vision for America. And it really inspired me.
That is really inspiring. Jennifer, give us a local perspective on how philanthropy can engage with government programs, and what is the United Way doing along those lines as we speak?
Thank you, Tony. And first, I want to say thank you for this invitation, and thank you for what you and Social Venture Partners Dallas continue to do to create opportunities for all North Texans to thrive. And I must say, like you, that I am proud and privileged to be here with one of our heroes, Darren Walker, who's a bridge builder who we both respect and admire so much, and whose leadership our country and world needs so desperately. So Darren, thank you for joining us. Being with you both today is a mad crush moment for me and such a complete honor. We see the role of government playing out in our work more and more every day, because increasingly, United Way of Metropolitan Dallas is serving as an intermediary between government and community-based organizations, particularly smaller grassroots entities that really are the trusted resources in many communities of color. And we know that direct support from government entities, whether it's cities, ISDs, county, states, or even from the federal government, to people is cumbersome at best. And it's not new for government entities to contract with nonprofit organizations to provide direct services, but managing those government contracts is difficult, if not impossible, for some smaller organizations with limited infrastructure and capacity to deliver. And so as a result, oftentimes those organizations are left out of the game. But increasingly, we're continuing to see those organizations as the best equipped to meet the needs of their own local communities, because they are the organizations that are driving impact. So forging partnerships with organizations like United Ways, local United Ways, has been really an effective way for these grassroots nonprofit organizations to get public funding, resources, and services into their communities. And one example that we've seen over the last 18 plus months in Dallas is with the city of Dallas, who's contracted with United Way of Metropolitan Dallas to distribute millions of dollars of federal funding to provide rental eviction prevention, assistance, and support. And we don't do this alone. United Way partners very closely with almost 20 small community-based organizations that operate directly with families in high-need neighborhoods. We established what we call the Dallas Rental Assistance Collaborative, and this partnership has resulted in keeping over 5,000 families housed throughout the pandemic. And the positive results are really dependent upon the partnership because it gives each entity the capacity to do what they do best.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for all of that work. Darren, the work that the United Way is doing to act as a vehicle for some of these fundings from the government is really extraordinary and impactful. But do you think that philanthropy has a voice to what the government is doing, or do you think philanthropy should stay away from that, given that, you know, there are mixed ideas and mixed notions? What do you think the role of the voice of philanthropy speaking to government should be?
Well, I think what Jennifer just described is the extraordinary beauty of American democracy at work. We have a nation that is built on the idea of a strong civil society, which Jennifer represents. It is foundational to the success and health and well-being of our democracy, as much as it is individual families, as she just described. But we also have a thriving private sector that includes philanthropy and private capital that is being deployed both for profit and, in the case of philanthropy, nonprofit through primarily our grants. And then government's role is critical. We need each of these stools, each of these legs of the stool to be healthy, to be muscular and vibrant and able to deliver. If we don't have that, we won't have a healthy democracy. The role of philanthropy cannot be to replace government, but philanthropy has a unique role because we can pilot, we can test, we can put capital at risk that others may not be willing to, government may not be able to. The private sector may see no market return for it. So philanthropy has a role to play. And as I said, I can give many, many examples of the way in which philanthropy was early seed capital for a big idea. For example, the public health system in this country was early funded by private philanthropy, most notably John D. Rockefeller. So there is a role in terms of philanthropy speaking directly to government. I think philanthropy's function is not to speak directly to government. It is to respond to the needs of citizens and to ensure that the communities that philanthropists live in are being served by the bounty of the wealth of those individual philanthropists. And in the aggregate, that philanthropy plays its role, but we sometimes hear rhetoric that would indicate that the private sector, that philanthropy can actually take the place of government. In a healthy democracy, that is not the case. And indeed, philanthropy doesn't have the resources. I mean, the Ford Foundation is a $16 billion endowment, but $16 billion is a rounding error on our national budget. So there isn't enough philanthropic dollars to actually take the place of government. And so I would hope that for all of us, if we actually care about solving major issues, we see that there is a role for philanthropy and a role for government, and both of them need to be healthy and vibrant.
I just want to push back on that a little bit and make sure I'm clear in my understanding. So you think that philanthropy should not do any advocacy work with government?
No, philanthropy is not itself engaging in direct advocacy, direct legislative election activity. That is not the role. That is not appropriate for philanthropy. There are many nonprofits who are engaged, and that is an appropriate role. But it is important to understand the difference between Jennifer's organization, which is a 501c3, and a private foundation like the Ford Foundation, which is a 501c3 version that has, along with it, certain restrictions, one of which is that it cannot engage in direct legislative policymaking activity. That is prohibited under the law, as it should be.
That's very helpful for our audience to understand. Jennifer, I know the United Way does some advocacy, and you can do it within certain bounds of your 501c3. Any comment on the role of advocacy here locally in Texas?
Sure. Our public policy agenda aligns with our community impact agenda. So we do use our voice in public policy debates to advance those goals that we've set in education, income, and health. And, as Darren said, those governmental resources complement what we're able to generate through philanthropic resources to help drive measurable, impact against our goals. So it is a part of how we use our voice to advocate for what we care about.
Thank you so much. I want to turn to the corporate question now. That in Texas, it's often referred to as the Texas miracle. Businesses just flock here, mostly because what some would refer to as corporate welfare, but the low tax rate and the incentives that governments offer to corporations, oftentimes at the expense of off the backs of the poor in the community who would be beneficiaries of some of these resources. What do you think is the role of corporate America in advancing social justice? And Darren, if you could respond to that, that would be great.
Well, I believe we live in a society that is special. I am a person who believes there is something unique and special about this country that we all love. And as I just reflect on my life and my own journey and how grateful I am to have been brought up and have been born in a country where, as a poor kid growing up, I felt that my country was cheering me on. That America was designed, in spite of its flaws and challenges, so that I could actually ultimately succeed, and that little boys and girls like me, living in shotgun houses on dirt roads, could actually dream, and that those dreams might be possible. And part of the reason for that was because we had the kind of economy, the kind of support that made it possible for a strong and vibrant middle class. And we had facilitators for mobility that allowed people like me, children like me, to get on that mobility escalator and soar. What I worry about today, Tony, is that young boys and girls living in rural Texas, in housing projects in Dallas, don't feel, as I did, that America is cheering them on, that this country, that Dallas, wants them to succeed. And part of the reason for that is because they know what you and I know, and that is that we have hollowed out the middle class in this country, that we see more inequality, economic inequality, and other forms of inequality than we've seen in over a century. And so for me, there was an America, a Texas, that provided opportunity for kids like me. And I don't think for many young Texans today, they feel that their state, their country is cheering them on. I was so lucky to attend the University of Texas. I could have attended many colleges, but to go to Austin to college was my dream. I never once considered affordability and cost as a barrier to my getting that education. And so I can only imagine what it must feel like today to be confronted with the reality that you could go to college and come away with six-figure debt at age 22. I mean, that's just, that would have been unimaginable for my generation. Now, I'm not saying that things don't change. Of course, things change. But if Texas becomes more unequal, if the economic system produces outcomes that look, yes, for those of us, like, certainly I can speak for myself, If you have assets, if you have real estate, if you've been lucky enough to be invested in the stock market for a decade or more, like many of us, we are winners in this system. This system has worked for us, but it is not working for far too many Texans and far too many Americans. So we need to think about what are the mechanisms that ensure that opportunity is available to every Texan, to every American. And part of that starts with people like us asking not what am I willing to give back, but what am I willing to give up to ensure that this country can continue to deliver on its promise of greatness, its promise of opportunity for everyone who dreams and works hard and plays by the rules. Because there are too many Texans and too many Americans, white, black, and brown, who feel that they are playing by the rule, that they are aligning themselves with the values of hard work, an ethic, character, integrity, and yet they have fallen farther behind. And that's not a political statement, that is a fact. We know from just about every credible economist and study that we are not producing mobility. If you want the American dream today, you need to move to Canada, because the Canadians are delivering every metric of well-being and social and economic mobility. The Canadians are outperforming us. So I think we need to think about in this country, what are the systems that produce more fairness? And if the systems are producing more bounty, if we are receiving the greatest part of the benefit of this great country, while most Americans, most Texans are being left behind, America is not going to be America. And that is something we should all mourn deeply.
You know, Jennifer, we really, you and I and our audience who is in this work daily completely resonate with what Darren just said, right? We completely get it, and it sounds, you know, it rings true. In your role, and you know, Texas and the Texas miracle and all of that, and the great divide between the haves and the have-nots, you know, we know that Texas is extraordinary in the business sector, but when it comes to the social determinants of health, the state scores very poorly. What are you hearing in Dallas with the corporations that you're working with? What do they see as their responsibility to assist, to make a counter to what Darren described as our current reality?
Yeah, so you know, Tony, and many in the audience, that United Way works very closely with the corporate community, and oftentimes we're viewed as a bridge between corporate funding and impact in the nonprofit sector. And our experience tells us that the corporate community here in North Texas is committed not only to raising awareness of the issues, but also action to drive change. I believe through the work that we do closely with corporate leaders that they understand the short and the long-term opportunity to build diverse and inclusive workforce pipelines, to recruit top talent across the state, and to protect the well-being of all of the people who keep our Texas business thriving day in and day out. And one clear example is the Southern Dallas Thrives initiative, which we've celebrated twice on the bigBANG stage with you, Tony. Southern Dallas Thrives was created with Frito-Lay and the PepsiCo Foundation. And Darren, I know you serve on the PepsiCo board and work closely with my good friend, Frito-Lay North America CEO and fellow United Way of Metropolitan Dallas board member, Stephen Williams. As you know, Stephen and his team are driving significant impact in North Texas through this initiative, Southern Dallas Thrives. And it was developed in partnership with Frito-Lay and the PepsiCo Foundation back in the fall of 2018, really to advance economic mobility for low-income women and children of color, Southern Dallas's most vulnerable and marginalized residents. Current and key focus areas under this initiative, there are really four things that we're focused on. One is increasing the quality of early childhood education, the levels of parent engagement and training by targeting the quality improvements to childhood centers in Southern Dallas through an initiative called First Five. The second area of focus is engaging high school students through providing career mentorship and workforce-centered experiences to increase youth workforce preparedness in partnership with the Dallas ISD and the South Oak Cliff Collegiate Academy. In addition to resources that they're providing, we're also providing to students resources focused on college exposure opportunities to ensure that post-high school academic success, it can be attained through the engagement of corporate partners. The third area of focus is connecting Southern Dallas families in need with nutritious meals and access to emergency food resources, as it is a food desert. And then the fourth area is providing workforce development training and career navigation to ensure that more women in Southern Dallas have the skills, have the education, and the support wraparound services necessary to enter and advance in the workforce. And while Frito-Lay and PepsiCo initiated this effort, it's always been their goal to bring other corporate partners to the table to increase the impact. And last year, Stephen Williams made possible a $5 million match for investments in Southern Dallas Thrives over the next 5 years. And more, guess what? More corporate funding followed. Vistra Corporation stepped up with $1 million investment in September of 2020. Hilti North America made a $250,000 investment, really with the focus to create a construction job training program for women in Southern Dallas. And just this September, last week, Celanese invested $1.4 million to support the work of Southern Dallas Thrives. And we anticipate continued growth in the coming months and years. So, I mean, how did we do that is a question that we ask ourselves often. And really understanding the need, the opportunities, and really identifying the community assets has been key to this initiative and really a critical first step in the development of the overall effort. Also, having a clear plan of action resulting in measurable progress has been essential. This type of work is well beyond what we think of as traditional charity. It's really about transformational change and engaging the community in designing and driving impact. And it's my hope that we continue to draw down that match much more quickly than Stephen anticipated, which would require a need to go back to the PepsiCo Foundation and others to ask for more matching funds. So that's a real concrete example of work that we're doing right here in Dallas with our corporate partners.
And can I just, Tony, on this point say, and just really commend Jennifer and the folks at the United Way there in Dallas, and also remind us that ultimately we want to help the populations that they are working with to have transformation in their lives. They are not going to have their lives transformed or materially improved if the only opportunity for them is low wage, no benefit, no opportunity employment. That we have to realize that if we want Texas to succeed, we cannot have a state, we cannot have an America that has such concentrated wealth in the hands of people like me, and so much poverty and misery among far too many. And this is a core issue that plays out every day, and it is challenging and difficult to talk about because it sounds ideological or deeply divisive to some, but it's not divisive in my view. The idea that we need an economy that works for more people is not a divisive idea. I think it's an idea that we should be using to mobilize and bring us together, because there is not enough intervention from programs like the one Jennifer talked about that I'm proud that we support at PepsiCo. There isn't enough that kind of intervention to make up for the stark reality of an economy that has created some of us as winners and most of our fellow citizens as losers in that economy. These people aren't losers. They should be winners. They have hopes and dreams, desires for their children. And yet we place barriers, too many barriers to their advancement in their way. So how do we help reduce those barriers? The barriers that allow them to make wages that are living wages, that allow them to live with dignity. To me, the idea of an America, a Texas, where people can work full time and still need an EBT card to make ends meet is absolutely antithetical to who we are as Americans. That people would work 40 and 50 hours a week and still be poor in an economy that produces that kind of work, that kind of return on labor, is just so deeply, profoundly disturbing to my sensibility as an American. And so I would just hope that while we celebrate the Texas miracle, and it is happening, I will tell you, there is no doubt that there are people who would wish to pay less in taxes, who would like to live and work in a place with a different regulatory framework. And I completely understand that. And of course, I'm not criticizing those people. I'm only saying that as a system, as a society, I know what we used to call third world countries look like. And what they look like are places where people who are wealthy live behind walls and in gated communities, and their children attend completely parallel universe of private everything. And that is a shame. One of the things I love saying to people is that I have never attended a day of private education in my life. From Head Start through my law school education in Austin, it was the public investment, a belief in Texas, a belief in Texans who were like me, that made it possible for me to be fully educated through a public system. And I say that often because on these panels from Davos to Aspen to wherever, I look around the room and rarely do I see anyone who can say that. And I don't think that that's a good thing, actually.
Yeah, I would be in complete agreement with you. You know, the conditioning to be pretty conservative in philanthropy and to only give X amount of percentages from the corpus and all of these kinds of attitudes, I don't think they're going to serve us any longer and serve us very well in the future. You've made some extraordinarily bold moves there in your leadership, and you are to be commended for those. Maybe you might describe one of them and encourage local foundations and philanthropists to follow your lead. Do you have a comment about that?
Well, I don't want to offer any critiques of the wonderful thing about philanthropy in this country, Tony, is the pluralism, that there are all sorts of foundations that fund many, many different issues, ideas, challenges, social problems, et cetera. I would say, though, that the thing that we've learned at Ford is that we have an endowment. We have an endowment that provides grant-making budgets, but that endowment sits there. It is indeed an investment vehicle. And so we started to ask ourselves, what are we investing in with that $16 billion? Are we investing purely for return, or are we investing for both a financial return and a social return? And we have, in recent years, started to veer in the direction of looking for both. And so we've allocated our first $1 billion for impact investing, to invest in things like affordable housing, which we now know because of the housing crisis in this country, we've underinvested. Now, we've invested in luxury housing, we've invested in high income housing. There's no doubt that there is an inventory of that, but there is far too little affordable working class housing, workforce housing. And that's what we are investing in at Ford as one example of the way in which we're using our endowment. We might have invested in luxury housing in the past, but as a matter of policy and a matter of aligning with our mission, affordable housing will provide us a decent return, and it will provide, hopefully, thousands of units of affordable housing, much needed. As Jennifer was just describing in their program, they are seeing at United Way every day how evictions are impacting people's lives, which is why Jennifer and her colleagues have to intervene with these kinds of anti-eviction programs and support for families who are at risk of eviction.
I am proud to say that Social Venture Partners has been leading a conversation and doing a lot of teaching on impact investing. And in fact, the Friday of the bigBANG conference is all dedicated to the concept of impact investing and has been for the last several years. And we have created quite an ecosystem here, finally in Dallas, of a lot of organizations that are starting to do that work. So we are pleased to hear the encouragement and that you have gone that direction as well. Jennifer, what would you describe as kind of the bold things that the United Way are doing here in Dallas?
Well, we're committed to becoming a fully inclusive, multicultural, anti-racist organization. And this is hard work that requires internal focus in order for us to make sure that we're making external changes to our investments, our partnerships, our advocacy, which we spoke about earlier, and all of our initiatives. We have a lot of work to do in continuation of our racial equity journey, but to that end, we are making some significant changes in our grant making process, and these changes will allow us to fully align with trust-based philanthropy, an approach that's giving, it addresses the inherent power imbalances between funders like us and others, nonprofits and the communities they serve. And at its core, trust-based philanthropy is about redistributing power systemically, organizationally, and interpersonally in service of healthier and more equitable nonprofit ecosystem. And so some of the changes to our process this next year will include ensuring that organizations have actionable non-discrimination policies that align to the creation of a fully inclusive, multicultural, anti-racist community in order to apply for funds from United Way Dallas. Another change is eliminating the requirement that an independent auditor be required for organizations that have gross annual revenues of less than $750,000. We're providing unrestricted grant awards, much more today than we ever have before, and prioritizing investments to geographies of the greatest need, where we see the most inequities and disparities, rather than broad distribution across our 4-county service area. And then finally, really being intentional about including community members in our grants review process and providing training and systemic racism and anti-bias training for all of our volunteers who are helping us make the decisions about where our precious donor dollars are invested. It's a tall order and it's a lot of work, but one that we are committed to achieving together with many partners over the next decade.
And this work is impressive, Tony, I would say, as someone who hears about these kinds of efforts. And we should be very clear that these efforts are meant to bring us together, not to divide us. That efforts to address equity, to reckon with the historic ways in which we have excluded some populations, some Texans, some Americans from participating, should not be challenged as divisive. They actually aim to bring us together. We must come together as a country. And I do believe that by calling us to our better angels, asking us, have we done enough to deal with the history of racism, the history of systems and structures that in many cases were designed to exclude some of us? Shouldn't we be making an effort to address and redress, and that people shouldn't see that as a threat, and that there should be, from these discussions, the kinds of inclusive outcomes that make us all feel more welcome, more belonging, more a sense of this being the country, the state that it really should be. So I deeply regret, and the Ford Foundation, as you know, Tony, has supported efforts around racial equity, which intend to do what our mission is, in part, to strengthen our democracy. We believe that America will be a stronger America if more of us participate in every facet of American life. And part of that requires us to understand our history, to understand the inequities that have existed. And while it's painful and it's difficult for many of us, and I know that we experienced this last summer with the murders that happened, where many people, many white Americans, felt heartbroken by what they saw that day in Minneapolis, because that is not the America that most of us, including most white Americans, believe should be this country. And so the reckoning of the systemic dimensions of that are necessary for the healing that we need to do as a state, as a nation. And so if we are to really realize the potential of this great state and the potential of this great country, we have to understand our history. We have to embrace the diversity, the complexity, the contradictions that are this great country, and feel good about that. Not be angry and enraged about it, but understand that there is no place in the world like America, where so many of us have come from different parts of the world, brought here under different circumstances, and we have made a commitment to build a great nation. And that is our work. That's the work ahead for us.
In our last few minutes that we have together, I want to again thank you, Jennifer, for your leadership here locally, for your willingness to step up and co-produce this conference year after year. And the title of the conference this year, of course, is Healing Our Divides, the New Economy. And Darren, we resonate with that. We believe that looking at different aspects and creating a new economy that all can participate in will do exactly what you have described and will be the thing that heals our divides. So, Jennifer, I want to thank you again for your leadership and your presence here today.
Thank you, Tony.
Darren, I want to, in our last couple of moments, you brought up the murder of George Floyd and all that we've gone through over these past year and a half, 2 years now. Sometimes it feels like, particularly in Texas, with some of the regressive laws around voting rights and other areas of rights that are being restricted, we sometimes in our work feel like we take 2 steps forward and some steps backward. And in your closing remarks for our audience here in Dallas today, what do you believe is our reason to have hope?
There are so many reasons for hope. I would tell you, first of all, certainly in Texas, there is so much talent. There is so much capital in that great state, so much financial capital and wherewithal, so much wealth. And there is so much human capital, the potential for individuals to do transformational things is infinitesimal in that state. And I think we should be hopeful in spite of the disappointments that many of us are experiencing. We should be hopeful because over many centuries, many generations, we have continued to fight, to plow ahead. And for me personally, Tony, I have no choice but to be hopeful because I stand on the shoulders of people who have believed in this country for 400 years, even when this country did not believe in us. We believed in America. And I'm reminded of Langston Hughes's great poem, Let America Be America Again, that he wrote in 1930, the height of the Depression, and as a Black man living in Harlem with talent, capacity, found himself penniless and homeless. But his poem says in the first stanza, let America be America again. America never was America to me. But he ends in the final stanza, let America be America. Oh yes, America someday will be. It was his enduring belief that this country would live up to its ideals. And even though he knew that in his life, he wouldn't see it, just as Fannie Lou Hamer, as Dr. King, as W.B. Du Bois, and so many other great heroes of mine knew that in their lifetimes, they wouldn't see the America that they hoped for, and yet they believed, and yet they were optimistic. Blood, tears, and lives were shed so that I could be here today with you. So I have no choice but to be hopeful and optimistic and to believe in America, even when I'm disappointed in America. Because I believe in the people in this country, in the goodness that rests within them, and that they will be called to deliver on this country's great ideals. That's why I'm hopeful and optimistic, Tony.
I know I speak for Jennifer as our co-producer and just are so grateful to you for being with us today, for being with us during Big Bang Week, and for your inspiring words. I would like, in addition to all the wonderful things that you have talked about, I would like to hold out a little hope. Jennifer, maybe you'll chime in with me on this, that next year for Big Bang at this time, you will come to Dallas and actually be with us on our stage, and we'll just have a great time honoring you and listening to your inspiring words. So what are my chances of securing that, Darren?
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to be honored, but I'm happy to show up and be in a conversation again with you and Jennifer. That would be a real treat for me.
All right, Jennifer, we got it. We got a verbal pledge there.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, both of you. I know our audience here in Dallas is deeply appreciative of the conversation, appreciative of the work that you're doing nationally, Jennifer, of the work that you're doing here locally. And, you know, when I think about what gives me hope, it is just being in the presence of people like you, of leaders like you. But every day, when I work with the men and women who join Social Venture Partners to give their time, talent, and financial resources to this community, it is just there. You have to be filled with hope. And that is what's going to get us through and keep us moving. So we just, again, appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to these sessions. Today's topic, justice and equity. Thank you so much to Jennifer Sampson of the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation, and of course, Tony Fleo with SVP Dallas. Also, this was sponsored by the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas and the Federal Reserve Bank. Shout out to SVP partner Roy Lopez. We heard many conversations of how to redefine systems and how to challenge them. And as I think about what Darren said and the society and how we all contribute to that, and we believe that America is built on strong society and values. And so I challenge each one of us to think about something that we could give up, as Darren mentioned, because it's not just what we can give of ourselves, but what we can give up, because we have to all recognize our individual privileges. And so as we think of mobility, we must think about ourselves on a micro level, but then also he spoke about the systems, the many systems and the key players, and how all of those contribute to what is and what can be change. And so lives are on the line. And so I challenge each and every one of us today watching bigBANG to say, what can we give up? And so as we continue this programming, you can learn more about justice and equity from different lenses, because there are many social problems in our society. And so these lunch sessions, you'll have the option of watching one of two sessions, one on homelessness and the other called Impact of Fines and Fees, and that's in partnership with the City of Dallas. We'll also have the opportunity to hear from This is Ear Hustle, which is brought to us by Crockett and Associates, Merrill Lynch, and KURA. And these are stories of incarceration. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will continue this program. I hope you enjoy it.